I recently attended a workshop that I'd like to talk a little bit about. It was called Vicarious Trauma, Help for the Helper. And it was put on in Spokane by a group called Faith Partners. And they put on multi-faith workshops whose purpose is to support faith communities as they serve their clients through life-altering experiences. And so most of the people that were at that workshop were people that work kind of in the trenches with people, human trafficking, sexual abuse, family and children issues, those kinds of things. But I think what I learned in that workshop is pertinent to certainly this community here. Oftentimes when we are talking to visitors, especially like on Sharing the Dharma Day with our discussions and such, many times they just open up to and tell us about events that have happened in their life that are quite traumatic. And so this workshop taught about how we work with ourselves around hearing information, hearing traumatic stories from others. Because the idea is of course that over time, if you don't kind of work at and look at how you're responding to these kinds of traumatic experiences, we just kind of absorb it. And it is quite detrimental over time. So let's see. So the interesting thing about this workshop was that it was, since it's called a workshop, it was experiential. It wasn't like a lecture. So we did things so that we could learn about how we experience difficult stories and difficult, other people's experiences, and kind of how we respond and react and how it affects us. So the first exercise we did in the workshop was to identify our qualities of excellence. And so, for example, some of the qualities that people, and we just kind of spoke out qualities of excellence. And so some of them were proactive, consistent, ethical, reliable, realistic, persistent, non-judgmental, trustworthy, patient, decisive, resourceful, flexible. So you get the idea, that kind of thing. And then the second thing that we were asked to do is to write down qualities of vulnerability, because it is the people that have these qualities of excellence that also are very much affected by traumatic stories of others. And so we want to pay attention to what our vulnerability qualities are. And so these were things like unrealistic expectations, denial, unhealthy boundaries, self-sacrificing, unresolved personal trauma, limited energy and resources, becoming jaded or cynical, becoming non-reactive or shutting down, becoming highly emotional or feeling great personal distress. And so this secondhand exposure, multiplied year after year, has an effect that can be traumatizing to us, either very subtly or actually quite blatantly. And so it's important to recognize the effect others' pain has on us, to normalize that we are going to react to other people's pain, that there's nothing weak or bad or wrong about that. It is part of our process here, actually, especially at the Abbey. And what I've noticed is the more that we work on opening our heart and being compassionate and developing our love, then the more important it is to really pay attention to how other people's traumatic experiences, their stories are affecting us. Mm. Because the more that we develop our love and compassion, then the really deeper that we experience other people's pain, because we have that capacity. So really the crux of this whole thing is all about self-care, all about self-care. And so we need to develop self-care skills that are meaningful and effective in order to not only survive, but to thrive. And so this self-care idea really emerges from very serious examination. And so the next thing that we did in the workshop was to identify how we experience stress that comes from caring for others who are stressed themselves, who have been traumatized, or are otherwise suffering. And so we looked at our own personal stress reactions in the categories of how we experience it physically, emotionally, and psychologically, and behaviorally. And so when you think about that, I was thinking about some examples so that we can get a kind of feel for this. And what I thought about is, in the news right now is really the devastation in Texas with the hurricane and the flood. And so hearing people talk about that, or looking at images or videos about the distress people are having, is a good example of how, while we're doing that, to check in to see how that is affecting me. So physically, do I notice that my heart might be racing a bit? I might have some adrenaline. My muscles might get tense while I'm watching it. So to pay attention, because that gives us clues about how we are experiencing the suffering of others. So that's the physical one. Emotionally and psychologically, I think it's looking at what our mind is doing in terms of reacting to what we're experiencing. Do we notice that our mood drops and we start getting discouraged or hopeless? Looking kind of at, oh, this is just so terrible, those kinds of things. Or like in the example of the flooding, do we notice that our attention is more toward, look at all of the people, just normal people in the neighborhoods that have boats and that are out on them and that are, rescuing people and helping? Are we looking at that side of it, or are we looking at, oh, this is just too big and it's too devastating? And again, not to make any judgment about ourselves, but just to see what our usual way of responding to these things is, so that we can get a handle on what our kind of knee-jerk responses are. Again, not judging it, it's just what it is, yeah. And then behaviorally, if we, have listened to somebody that has, really difficult experiences, like sometimes after sharing the Dharma Day, and we've been in the discussion group, and it's like, whoa, that was a big story someone told, and they were crying, and they were in a lot of distress about it. Then after that, how do we respond behaviorally? Are we... do we go and look for the chocolate and, try to, soothe ourselves that way? Do we get kind of cranky and irritable? Do we kind of get shut down, So to see how we behave after that, again, not in terms of any judgment, but with a lot of compassion, just to see what kind of our knee-jerk reactions are. Because most of these reactions really were learned and set down when we were quite young, So there's nothing to judge about this. It's just how we tried to cope. It's okay, Then the next part of the workshop was about starting to develop a personalized plan of self-care for ourselves. And this workshop was only in the morning, so it was quite brief. So this was a ton of information. So we didn't really go into this very much during that workshop, but they asked that we, once we, got home, whatever, started thinking about that. And so the tasks to look at in a plan of self-care includes physical well-being. And so what that means to me initially is that when I'm listening to something that is distressing, do I actually know that? And am I present to that so that I can see how I'm reacting? And so I can apply some methods to help balance myself. So will I take some deep breaths, or am I holding my breath when I'm hearing these things, for example? Am I going to relax my muscles, or am I going to be very tight and tense, for example? Emotional well-being, intellectual well-being, spiritual well-being. So, and again, how can I apply my values and my belief about, why terrible things happen to people, and how can I kind of work with that in my mind? Again, to find some kind of balance with that. The next one was to cultivate delight in the day. Or what I think of sometimes, what we do here often is how can we apply humor so that we can lift ourselves up a little bit and not be so, so heavy. So maybe we think of it in terms of the absurdity of things or whatever. And then the next one was kind of a work to home transition. So if you hear something and you have a really hard day, and then you're going to have your own time, for people that are out in the world working, it's from work to home transition. How do you do that transition? How do you make the switch? Because you need to, yeah? For here, it may be, what we do in offering service time, and then what we do in our own personal study time, to consciously make a transition. And to me, what that means is check in with myself. How am I? What do I need right now? Because it's been a very full, very maybe emotionally draining day. Well, what am I going to do for me now? And not think that that's something that's selfish, or, I shouldn't be looking at that or whatever. To actually put that into play for ourselves. And then the next one was messages of intentions and values to state to oneself every day. And so we do a pretty good job of that here, I think, in the morning when we set our intention to do no harm, to be of benefit, and to cultivate our bodhicitta. But just doing it, in the morning at 5:35 or whatever, and never thinking about it again the rest of the day, it isn't really alive. Just like Venerable Sultram was saying today in meditation, to bring that forward, what does that actually mean? So, checking in with myself, where am I? What is my capacity? Am I just pushing through, or do I have some energy here? And if I'm just pushing through, what can I do to kind of revitalize and to renew, So that means water breaks, taking some time, stepping back, changing my focus, seeing a bigger picture, all of these kinds of things that we know what to, use different antidotes to. And then to consciously develop a plan of recovery from really the most difficult days. Now, what are we going to do with that, So again, we have to, on the cushion, see what is it that triggers me the most, and how am I going to meet that? Because I'm going to get triggered here in life, everywhere. How am I going to work with that? And what's the first thing, of course? Compassion. Compassion. Not to deny it, accept it, and with compassion, then start working with it, whatever it is. Yeah. And so if we kind of keep track of ourselves throughout the day, then we can continue to rebalance ourselves with whatever's coming at us and whatever we're working with. And the more we practice that, the better we get at it. And then we really increase our capacity for not only caring for others, but for self-care. And we all deserve that, without a doubt. Yeah. Yeah.